25 years on from those Olympics, Trans World Sport headed to Southern California to meet up with Greg Louganis and to reflect on the events of '88 and on the career of one of the most remarkable athletes of modern times. A man who's a true soul survivor.
6 months prior to the 1988 Olympic Games, I was diagnosed HIV positive. And my thought at the time was I was going to do the honorable thing, because in '88 we thought of HIV/AIDS as a death sentence. So I figured I was training in Florida, I was going to pack my bags, move back to California, lock myself in my house and wait to die. That's what my mindset was. I felt like I was living on an island with barely a phone for communication to the outside world. And I couldn't have gotten through that Olympic Games without my coach, Ron O'Brien. We were an incredible team. I mean, he was the only other person on the pool deck who knew of my HIV status. You know, because at that time in Seoul, Korea, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to compete at that Olympic Games. I wouldn't have been allowed into the country.
Louganis remains the greatest diver the world has ever seen. He was one of those rare athletes who came to define their sport. With a combination of power and grace, he made things look effortless, and the American would regularly win competitions by huge margins. Yet, behind the serenity and control that characterized him as a sportsman, Greg's personal life rarely matched his public one. Given up for adoption by his 15-year-old parents, Greg experienced a difficult childhood. He was bullied at school and began smoking, drinking, and taking drugs in his early teens. He battled depression and even attempted suicide. Greg survived these times by escaping into the world of diving.
I started in dance and acrobatics when I was a year and a half, performing on stage when I was 3. So I was a performer before I was anything. And I viewed my diving as a performance more so than a competition. I'm not real competitive. I had to learn how to compete. So fortunately, I learned those lessons.
Over the next decade, with Greg dominating the world of diving, gold replaced silver as his medal of choice. He won 5 world, 6 Pan American, and 47 national titles. He was the first diver in history to score more than 700 points in competition, and the first to receive a perfect 10 from all 7 judges at a major international meet.
You know, when I won my first Olympic gold medal in '84, it was like, okay, 1 down, 1 to go. You know, I was thinking ahead. It was expected in 1984, you know, because I was world champion in '82, you know, by a pretty big margin in the 3-meter springboard contest.
By the mid-'80s, Greg was at the peak of his powers. But despite his success, his personal life was beset with problems. Although not open about his sexuality in the '80s, Greg was involved in a relationship with his former business manager. That man not only defrauded Greg of vast amounts of money, but he was also abusive towards him, even raping Louganis at knife point on one occasion. Their toxic relationship continued as Greg prepared for the Seoul Olympics. In early 1988, Greg's partner tested positive for HIV. The same fate befell Louganis soon after.
In 1988, I sat down with my cousin who was my doctor, and he said, you know, the healthiest thing you can do is continue diving. And so I made that decision to focus on my diving. As long as I was busy, you know, as long as I had my training to go to, you know, I always showed up, you know, I was always early, always prepared. If I had interviews that were, you know, set up, then I'd be there, you know. But those rest days, those days that I had nothing to do, I was lucky if I got out of bed and poured myself a bowl of cereal. I mean, that's how depressed I was.
Louganis kept his diagnosis hidden from everyone but a select few, which included his coach Ron O'Brien. No officials or fellow divers from the US team knew of his status, and he had to smuggle his HIV medication into South Korea.
The only drug that we had at that time was AZT, and that was prescribed to be taken every 4 hours around the clock. In the middle of the night, in the middle of the morning, every 4 hours you're reminded you have a compromised immune system. Going into that Olympic Games, I was the favorite, but in that split second when I hit my head on the board in the prelims, I became the underdog. You know, and being the underdog, it's human nature to root for the underdog, so it was a much better place for me to be. There was so much stigma surrounding HIV/AIDS, and I knew that it was a story that I knew in my heart that I could never share. So, you know, and here I am at 53, you know, 25 years later, you know, and still going strong, and I've told my story in my own way, you know, and in my own words.
Today, Greg lives in Malibu. It was during the mid-1990s, amidst a storm of publicity, that he publicly announced that he was both gay and HIV positive. His 1995 autobiography, Breaking the Surface, topped the bestseller charts in America. Over the years, thanks to advances in HIV treatment, Louganis has beaten back the virus, and his daily life reveals little evidence of his condition.
Most of my health and wellness evolves around exercise, and that includes spin and yoga. I love yoga because there's a meditative element to that, meditation in motion. And that's how I view peak performance as well. Peak performance is meditation in motion, there's no thought. Doctors will tell you, oh, you know, you got 6 months, you got to, I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that. So, doctors are always giving you limits, you know, and I don't believe in limiting myself. I go and get my blood drawn, and he tells me my numbers, and he puts that file on the shelf, and that's where I put it too. Numbers are just numbers. You know, I take my meds in the morning, take my meds in the evening, and go about the business of living.
That business of living includes Greg's current role within US diving.
In 2010, Steve Foley, a friend of mine from Australia, he got the job for High Performance Director of USA Diving. And so he said, you know, let's get together. And I thought it was just a social visit, but he said, well, how do we get you back involved in diving? I said, ask. You know, he said, oh, you've never been asked? I said, no, you know, nor did I feel invited. So we tried to figure out what I had to offer. And what we came up with was a mentoring program.
Greg now passes on his years of experience to the latest generation of American divers as they try to keep pace with China, the current dominant nation in the sport.
Fast arms, stay over the board.
Since retiring from diving following the Seoul Olympics, Greg has been involved in a number of different fields. He's acted in plays and films and is a familiar face on US TV. He was recently the dive master in the American version of the reality show Splash, in which celebrities are taught to dive. Greg also continues to be one of the most influential and notable advocates for AIDS awareness. He frequently appears alongside the likes of Bill Clinton and Elton John at various events.
Just a little longer with your biceps on your ears. Okay? The message that I try and drive home, especially with young people, is love yourselves enough to protect yourselves and those that you're with.
Today, Greg is happier in his personal life than he's been in a long time, and that has a lot to do with his partner, Johnny. The duo recently announced their engagement and plan on getting married later this year. After all the turmoil and trauma that he's gone through in his life, It seems that Greg Louganis finally has in his grasp that most valuable of prizes: contentment.
I think somebody asked me at one time, what do I want on my epitaph? If it's a description of me as a diver, I would hope that I would be remembered as being strong and graceful, but more importantly, as a person. And I think it's something that we're all trying to do as human beings, is make a difference. That I hope my time here has made a difference.